The night smelled faintly of pine and rain as the hotel terrace glowed under a low, watchful moon. Tonight was supposed to be the night my fated mate and I got engaged. Instead, I stood at the edge of the ballroom, breathing slowly while Ethan kissed another woman, as if destiny had changed its handwriting. She was the daughter of Gavin Landry, the most powerful Lycan chairman in the world. Marrying her could make him the future alpha. Part of me understood the logic. The rest of me just felt very, very quiet inside. A few months ago, our alpha died in battle, and the pack began to tilt like a ship in dark water. Candidates stepped forward. Positions hardened. Alliances whispered in corridors. Everyone knew the Lycans shaped the currents that moved our kind, and Gavin Landry could name a wave alpha if he chose. I told myself I was fine, that my chest wasn't tight, that the thin silver ache at my mate mark was only in my head. The string between us still hummed, though he had already chosen to retie his future. I slipped onto a bar stool where the music softened into a velvet hush. "Get me a whiskey and a martini for the lady," a deep voice said near my shoulder. The sound wrapped around me, warm and precise. "Tell me," he murmured, "is it the future bride or the future groom that has you under a cloud?" "I'm just not into parties," I answered, keeping my voice even. "Nor am I," he said, as if confiding a small truth. "I'm here out of obligation." The bartender slid the glass my way. I took a careful sip and let the cool brightness settle on my tongue. The room slowed a little. The chandelier sang softly with a draft only the crystals could feel. Each time Ethan's laughter rose across the dance floor, a corner of my breath went missing. 2 years together had been a shoreline I thought I knew. Tonight, the tide had a new map. "Thank you for the drink," I told the stranger, setting the stem down. I turned to leave, but my blouse caught on the hard edge of the counter with a tiny sound, fabric yielding where it shouldn't. My balance tipped. I closed my eyes for the fall that never came. Arms found me instead, sure, unhurried, as if catching me had been decided long before the moment arrived. He lifted me with ease. When I opened my eyes, a face came into focus, sculpted lines, a steady mouth, and eyes that watched like winter waters. Reflective, clear, deep. A small dimple flickered to life when he smiled. "Madam," he teased softly, "are you falling for me?" Heat touched my cheeks before I could conjure a reply. "You're very funny." His gaze dipped to the rip in my blouse, and the humor faded into something considerate. "I have a spare shirt upstairs. VIP suite." The offer was simple, practical. No insinuation. Just a door held open. "Oh," I said, a little breathless. "Thank you." He told the bartender to charge both drinks to his suite and guided me through the slow river of guests. I walked beside him, not touching, yet acutely aware of the space we shared. The corridor was hushed and carpeted, the kind that softened footsteps into a private language. In the elevator, our reflections stood shoulder to shoulder in the mirrored walls, a woman trying not to break, and a man built like a decision. In the suite, city lights lay below us like a spill of stars. He opened a wardrobe, considered a few options, then chose a crisp, pale shirt. "I'll turn around," he said, and did. I changed quickly, grateful for the clean fabric against my skin. It smelled faintly of mint and cedar, a calm forest memory stitched into cotton. When he faced me again, something like recognition passed through his expression. Too subtle to name, too real to ignore. I knew him then, not from rooms like this, but from whispers that traveled far. Gavin Landry. Lycan chairman. The man whose nod could change a lineage. "I know of you," I said quietly. "Most prefer the rumors," he replied, a corner of his mouth tilting. "You? I prefer what people do when no one's looking." He considered that, then took a step closer, not crowding, simply narrowing the distance until I could feel the cadence of his breathing. The air changed, warmer at the edges. Outside, rain touched the window in small, tender sounds. Inside, time made itself very still. "Your eyes," I heard myself say before I could retreat into discretion. "They're difficult to look away from." "And yours," he returned, as if noting a fact on a form. "Very honest for a night like this." Silence settled lightly between us, not awkward, more like the moment before a string is plucked. He reached up, not to claim, not to demand, only to brush a stray lock from my temple. The gesture was careful, as if he were moving a thought into place. The line of his jaw was steady. The gravity of him felt like a safe shore. Our words thinned. The room leaned toward possibility. If he had bent the slightest bit closer, I might have learned the taste of winter mint on his mouth. But the bond inside me shivered, and a thread of sound entered my mind, urgent and beloved. Judy, please come home. My mother's voice through the mind link was never frantic. Tonight it trembled. The spell of the sweet broke with a gentleness that made me grateful for it. I stepped back, pulse recalibrating. I'm sorry, I said, finding the steadiness I needed. I have to go. He studied my face for a heartbeat, reading what I couldn't quite say. He didn't argue or press. He simply nodded, reached past me, and eased the lapels of the borrowed shirt into place with the same thoughtful care as before. Keep it, he said. You can return it another time. I hesitated at the door, feeling the quiet weight of the city and the softer weight of his gaze. Thank you, I managed, and meant far more than the fabric. The elevator hummed me back down through floors of light. In the lobby, the pianist had shifted to a slower melody, each note a small mercy. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked into it, breathing through the ache, counting my steps the way warriors count their calm. By the time I reached the street, the rain had thinned to silver threads. The shirt held his scent like a reminder that not everything had to hurt. Somewhere above me the moon slipped behind a gentle cloud, and the world exhaled. I followed the quiet home, one breath then another, letting the city's hush soften the edges of my heart. The house was dark when I slipped inside, carrying the damp hush of the night with me. The borrowed shirt held the faintest whisper of mint, like a lantern for the nerves. Before I could switch on a light, I heard my mother in the kitchen, her breath catching in small, uneven waves. Judy? She called, as if saying my name might stitch something together. I found her at the table with a mug she wasn't drinking. The steam had long gone. Her eyes were red in a way I had never seen on her. For a moment we only listened to the old clock, its calm hands moving forward no matter what we asked of time. They took your father, she said, voice barely above a prayer. The Gammas came tonight. The word landed softly and still felt heavy. Pack law, oaths, debts, all the structures that hold us until they press too hard. Why? I asked, though I already felt the shape of the answer. A deal went bad, she whispered. The business fell through. The numbers were not what he believed. They said he owes the pack more than he can pay. She closed her eyes, as if that could change the sum. They'll hold him until restitution. I sat with her in the thin light and let silence do the first comfort. Sometimes the kindest thing is to be quiet beside the wound. I held her hand. We breathed together. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere a branch tapped the window like the world reminding us it was still there. My phone vibrated on the table. Ethan's name traced across the screen like an old habit. My pulse tightened, then steadied. I stepped outside to answer, not wanting my mother to hear whatever came next. I heard about your father, Ethan said, voice gentled for the occasion. I can help. The night was cool and lucid. I could see my breath in the porch light.
How? I have the funds, he said.
I can pay what he owes. A brief pause. Come outside. He was already at the curb when I reached the gate, his arms folded over a dark jacket, the posture of a man who believes the ending belongs to him. The moon sat low, quiet as a witness. What do you want in return? I asked, keeping my voice even. His mouth curved, not unkind, but not soft. After I'm married, he said, leave school. Move into the house I've arranged. I'll take care of your father's debt. I'll take care of you. The words were smooth, almost like shelter if I didn't listen to the weather underneath. The air went very still. My wolf lifted her head, not to snarl, only to listen hard. I can't do that, I said gently. He stepped closer, not touching. You're thinking with pride, he replied. Think with strategy. This is clean, discreet. You'll never want for anything. I want my dignity, I said, even softer. And my future. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, then impatience, then the mask of a man who has decided not to be crossed. I'm about to be alpha, he said, a reminder and a warning at once. This is how the world works. I thought of the ballroom and the chandelier, of the way I had felt invisible and then seen, of a steady hand placing a collar flat, of my mother's mug growing cold because she could not swallow what the night had given her, of numbers and oaths and what we spend of ourselves when we're frightened. No, I said again. I'll find another way. He searched my eyes, perhaps for the girl who used to trace futures on his palm. She wasn't available? Not tonight. You'll change your mind, he said at last, as if making a promise to a mirror. 5 million is a lot to pull from thin air. I won't pull it from thin air, I answered. I'll build it from ground. We stood there for a few breaths longer, the quiet between us settling like snow that doesn't expect anyone to notice it. He exhaled, sharp around the edges, then turned toward his car. I watched the taillights go, small red moons sinking down the street, until the road belonged to crickets again. Back inside, I warmed fresh water for my mother's tea and set the kettle to its small, comforting song. She touched the cuff of the shirt I wore and frowned a little, curious. I only shook my head and she let it be. Some questions can rest until the morning. We made a list on a folded envelope, lawyers to call, elders to petition, places that might hire for quick, decent work. Every plan felt both too small and exactly what we had. I liked the shape of that feeling. It was honest. It asked us to stay gentle and keep going. When she finally slept, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the moon slip free of cloud. It looked less jealous tonight, more like a watchful aunt. The wind moved through the trees with a voice I could almost understand. If I had cried earlier, the tears had dried into salt that made me feel more awake than tired. I closed my eyes and let my breathing lengthen. In and out, a tide anyone can meet. When the mind wanted to replay doors that had shut, I gave it a quieter scene. The first snowfall over the training field, the hush of pine on a trail at dawn, the soft thud of my heartbeat when I land a form just right. Tomorrow, I would enroll in whatever classes I could still afford and find work that paid with dignity. I would call the Gamma office and ask for the terms in writing. I would learn the corners of the debt until the number stopped being a storm and started being a map. If the path required me to walk slower, I would make that slowness my strength. I laid my cheek against the back of the couch and let the night draft loosen one curl at my temple. Somewhere out there, a man with winter water eyes was finishing paperwork by lamplight, or not sleeping at all. Somewhere, the future waited for kinder hands. When I finally rose, I turned off the lamp and let darkness take the room kindly. The moon dimmed behind a cloud and reappeared like a reassurance. I took it as one. Step by step, I told the quiet. Breath by breath, the quiet agreed. Morning arrived like a pale ribbon over the rooftops, and the world felt newly washed. I laced my boots and went to the training field early, before most students drifted in. The grass kept the night's dew, cooling my ankles. I warmed my muscles with slow, familiar movements until my breath and body were on the same page again. In warrior class, we practiced forms that looked like water learning its own shape. Quiet blocks, gentle pivots, balance that began in the feet and climbed calmly through the spine. My mind wanted to sprint into problems. The routine coaxed it into walking. Shifting class came after, a lesson in listening. Not every transformation needed to be dramatic. Our instructor spoke in a steady voice about attunement, ears before teeth, patience before power. We stood in a loose circle and practiced the small things, feeling the wind thread through hair, noticing the way scent braided pine with distant rain, letting shoulders loosen the way a wolf loosens before settling. I didn't push the change. I stood close to it and breathed, grateful for a body that could be many things and still be mine. At noon, I met Nan under the old oak that had watched 1,000 students decide who they were. The bark held the sun's warmth. Its shadow made a kind of temporary room for secrets. She handed me half a sandwich and a look that said she'd wait for whatever I was ready to say. I went up to a suite last night, I told her softly. He changed into a clean shirt, I touched the cuff, subconsciously smoothing a crease. It belonged to Gavin Landry. Nan's eyes widened, then softened. She didn't squeal or make a joke. She only breathed out slowly, as if not to startle the moment. And he was kind, I said, searching for the simplest honest word. Considerate in small ways. I left early. My mother called. I stared at the rings in the oak's wood. I slept in his shirt and didn't feel like a thief. We ate in quiet, which felt like care. When I told her about my father, about the gammas and the debt that sounded like a storm, she listened with her whole face. When I told her what Ethan had proposed, her jaw tensed, but she kept her voice low. "I'm sorry," she said, "because apologies have a way of making space. You didn't deserve that choice." "I won't take it," I said. The words felt like stones placed in a new foundation. "I'll find a path that lets me hold my head up." Nan tilted her head. "Gavin runs currents most of us only read about," she murmured. "But he's still a person in a body. People notice steadiness. If you ask for help with dignity, with terms, maybe he hears you better than you think." "He owes me nothing," I said. "That's why an honest ask matters," she replied. "You're not a favor. You're a future with a plan." The afternoon unspooled gently. Between classes, I went to the library and found a quiet table near a window. I made a simple list of facts and questions in small, neat handwriting, the exact amount of the debt, the official process for petitioning elders, the Gamma office hours, what documentation we had, what was missing, and what I could offer beyond gratitude: part-time work with PAC administration, community service, tutoring for younger trainees, any contribution that returned value. Naming each piece made the whole less noisy. By the time the sun angled toward evening, I had a letter drafted, plain, respectful, brief. At home, I cooked something light for my mother, and we ate together without forcing conversation's shape. After I ironed the borrowed shirt, not to erase its story, but to smooth it into readiness. The fabric took the heat and gave back a faint breath of mint. I put the letter in a folder with our papers and a pen that writes cleanly the first time. Then I sat at the window and watched the human city glow on the horizon, a scatter of small suns. Someone out there was making choices in rooms I could barely imagine. I wondered if he also paused to listen to a night breeze moving along a sill. Before bed, I wrote my father a note in my cleanest script. I didn't promise outcomes, only effort. I told him about the old oak, about the way the training field held the morning like a secret, about how the moon looked kinder when I chose to look back. I told him I loved him, and that love was a kind of work I was glad to do. Sleep came softly. When dreams found me, they were quiet landscapes, a trail through pines, a silver river, the feeling of being led forward by something that was not a rope but a hand. The next morning, the sky was a calm sheet of grey, the kind that blesses decisions. I dressed simply, tied my hair back, and slipped the folder into my bag. The city street was washed clean from a night rain. Tires whispered instead of hissed. As I neared the glass building with Landry's name in restrained letters, I felt my heart begin its old ambitious drum and asked it to slow. Elevators have their own weather. Lobbies have their own tides. I stepped inside and became part of it. The receptionist looked up with the practiced patience of someone who has seen many versions of this scene. "Good morning," she said, professional, neutral. "Good morning," I replied. "I'm here to request a brief meeting with Mr. Landry." I placed my letter on the counter, face down. "If his schedule allows. If not today, then any time he chooses." Her eyes scanned me, not unkindly, just measuring the fit between policy and possibility. Phones rang somewhere distant. The elevator chimed softly in a corner, like a spoon against porcelain. She reached for the handset, then paused, perhaps surprised to find her hand moving. "Your name?" "Judy Montague," I said, voice even. "Red Moon Pack." She nodded, lifted the receiver, and spoke in a low tone I couldn't catch. I stood in the easy posture my instructor had taught us, weight over arches, breath soft, gaze at a gentle middle distance. The building hummed its quiet chorus of air and light and unseen systems doing their work. I let it steady me. The receptionist listened, then stilled. Her eyes flicked up to mine with a look I couldn't read yet. "One moment," she said as the elevator chimed again, closer now. Doors gliding open with that particular grace, expensive machinery, as when it's well cared for. I folded my hands and waited, letting calm be the first answer I gave the day. The elevator doors opened with a quiet sigh, and a man stepped out as if the building itself had arranged the moment. Gavin Landry didn't need an introduction. Rooms seemed to know him before he arrived. He glanced at the receptionist's handset still lifted toward her ear, then at me, then back to her with a mild frown that felt more like procedure than anger. "Miss Montague has requested a brief meeting," he said, voice even as if stating a weather report. "I'll take it." The receptionist flushed, set the phone down, and nodded. I thanked her softly. We rode up together without conversation. Elevators have their own silence. This one carried the hush of carpeted halls and sealed glass. I watched my reflection steady beside his, my borrowed shirt ironed smooth, his cuffs rolled once, precise. The numbers climbed. My breath kept a slow rhythm. His office wasn't a room so much as a horizon indoors, marble that held the day's pale light, a long desk near windows that made the city look like a constellation laid flat. He didn't sit. He gestured to a low chair near a small table instead, a choice that felt less like an interview and more like a pause. "Water? Tea?" he asked. "Water is fine. Thank you." I placed my folder on the table, opened it carefully, and slid a single-page letter forward. "This explains the situation. My father was taken by the Gammas 2 nights ago. The debt is substantial," I breathed once. $5 million. I'm petitioning for process and options. I'm not asking for a gift. I'm asking how to do this correctly, and whether there is a path that involves work, terms, and time. He listened the way some people read, line by line, without impatience. He skimmed the letter, then the few documents I'd gathered. Notices, business statements, a stamped receipt from the Gamma office acknowledging custody. He set each page down in order, edges aligned. "Why not go to the candidates?" he asked at last, calm, clinical. "Ambition often makes men generous." "I did," I said, keeping my tone neutral. The terms were not fit for my dignity or my future. Something unreadable moved through his expression. He sat across from me, elbows on knees, hands folded. Up close, he looked less like a title and more like a person whose days were built from decisions. "What are you offering?" "A repayment schedule," I said. "I can take on administrative work for the pack, community hours, training support. I can teach fundamentals to younger warriors. I can do whatever is useful and recorded. I'll sign whatever allows oversight. It will take time, but time is work I know how to do." He leaned back, considering. The city's light shifted against the glass as a cloud changed its mind. "You wore that shirt home," he said quietly. Not flirtation, not claim, only an observation about continuity. "I plan to return it clean," I answered. "You said to keep it." "I wasn't sure if you meant forever, or just until I saw you again." "I meant you didn't owe me anything for it," he said. "And I meant I didn't want you to feel you did." We let that rest. He stood, walked to his desk, and pressed a button on a small console. "Laura, please send Mr. Kim from legal up." A slim, meticulous man arrived with a notepad and a pen that clicked once and then never again. Gavin gestured to the folder. "Scan and verify these. Confirm the Gamma hold and the debt instrument. I want the official path and the discretionary path, both in writing." "Yes, sir." When we were alone again, Gavin's gaze returned to mine, steady as a hand on a shoulder. "I do not buy people," he said, voice low even. "I don't rent them either. If I help, it will be on terms that keep your head high when you look at your reflection. Are you prepared for the pace that kind of help requires?" "Yes," I said. The word felt like a key in the right lock. He nodded once. "If the documents confirm what they appear to, there are 3 avenues. 1, a structured bond with PAC oversight. 2, temporary placement with pay that routes directly to the debt until threshold. 3, a petition to the elders for partial reduction given the public interest. Rare, but possible if you anchor it with service. None are fast. All require patience." "Patience I can do," I said. "Good," he replied. "Then you'll start by not skipping meals while you're solving this." There was the faintest wryness there, a concern disguised as instruction. "Mr. Kim will give you the next steps by end of day. You may leave your number with Laura." I rose, and the chair made a soft sound against the rug like a sigh. "Thank you," I said. It felt insufficient and exactly right. He walked me to the elevator. We paused as the doors slid open, polished panels reflecting the pale light across his white cuffs. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Red Moon trains well. I can smell the field on your shoes. Don't stop going there. It will carry more weight than you think." I smiled, small and genuine. "The field keeps my mind from running ahead without me." "Good," he said again, almost under his breath, as if filing a detail where it might be useful later, downstairs. Laura took my number with a professionalism that had softened at the edges. "You'll hear from legal," she said. "If you don't by sunset, call me." She slid a card across the counter with a direct line, handwritten on the back. "Just in case systems forget, they are for people." Outside, daylight had thinned into a bright, pearly afternoon. I called Nan as I walked, and we met at a small cafe with a window that framed the sky like a painting. I told her everything. The office like a horizon, the options listed like steps, the way his voice never had to rise to fill the room. "So, a path," she said, softer than a cheer, more like a blessing. "A path," I agreed. She stirred her tea and watched the swirl resolve. "I spoke to a friend at the Crescent Lounge," she added after a moment. "Evenings are short-staffed. It's not glamorous, but the manager is fair, and the tips help. If you want the number, it's yours. You can pick shifts that don't clash with classes." I thought about the folder, the patience, the long distances. "Yes," I said. "I'll take the number." By dusk, I had a trial shift arranged, a uniform sized with modesty in mind, and a start time after my afternoon training. The manager's voice on the phone had been pleasantly ordinary. "Be kind, be steady, and leave drama at the door," he'd said. "We'll do the same." At home, I cooked something simple that made the kitchen smell like childhood. My mother ate more than the night before. We washed dishes in companionable quiet, and I put the clean plates away with the care of someone rebuilding shelves. When she went to bed, I ironed the borrowed shirt again, not because it was wrinkled, but because I liked the slow glide of the warm iron, the way fabric yields and becomes itself again. I set my alarm and turned off lights one by one until the house held only the small glows it needed. The porch lamp, the stove clock, the soft blink of a charger. In my room, I left the window cracked to let in a thread of night air. Somewhere far off, a train hummed, and then the sound was gone. I lay on my side and counted breaths. When my thoughts tried to sprint, I reminded them of steps, document, petition, work, rest. When my heart tried to argue with the past, I let it sit at the edge of the training field and watched the first light arrive. Sleep folded over me like a clean sheet. The city exhaled. The moon climbed, gentle and sure, and the house agreed to keep us safe until morning. The Crescent Lounge woke slowly after sunset, like a lantern being turned up notch by notch. The manager showed me the stations, the little rituals. Polish the glasses in circles that make your mind quiet. Stack the napkins so the edges line up like calm thoughts. Stay present, and the room will meet you there. My uniform was simple and neat. I pinned my hair back and breathed until the mirror offered me back a steadier version of myself. The first hour was a soft tide. Couples spoke in low voices. A trio in suits traded stories they'd tell the same way tomorrow. I moved through it with gentle steps, writing orders in a clean hand, refilling water before anyone needed to ask. The music was the kind that never interrupts. Small piano phrases that knew how to leave space around a conversation. I liked the pace. I liked being useful. When tips appeared, I tucked them away like small votes of confidence. Near 9, a louder wave entered, laughter a touch too sharp for the room. Cologne that didn't know its own boundaries. I looked up because the body does that before the mind agrees, and saw Ethan among the group. He didn't look at me right away. He surveyed the lounge as if assessing a field, then took a table halfway back, where shadows give a person privacy and a stage at once. I carried menus over with the same even breath I would have given to any group. "Good evening," I said, the words resting lightly on the air. "Can I start you with water or tea while you decide?" A few of them traded glances, grins, trying on shapes. I kept my posture easy, weight over arches, kindness like a spine. When someone's joke nudged past polite, I pivoted with a practiced smile. "We keep the room gentle here," I said, not scolding, only setting the temperature. "Thank you for matching it." The manager drifted by, not hovering, simply present enough to remind the table the house had a heartbeat. The group settled. Orders were ordinary. Sparkling water, 2 lagers, a small plate they'd likely ignore. I moved on to other tables, kept the current smooth. When I returned with their tray, Ethan finally met my eyes. Something old moved there, something I once would have leaned toward. Now I placed the glasses, one by one, like stones across a stream. "Anything else for now?" I asked. "Just a word," he said, voice low. Outside, I glanced at the manager. He gave the smallest nod. On the curb, the night air felt clean, the kind of cool that calms a face flushed by a busy room. Traffic hummed like a distant hive. Above us, clouds made soft braids across the moon. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said, hands in his pockets, shoulders in that careful line he wore when he thought persuasion was kindness. "There's an easier path." "I'm choosing a steadier one," I answered. He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You turned down stability once. You'll circle back." "Stability and ownership are not the same thing," I said, gentle and plain. His jaw worked. For a moment I saw the boy who used to skip stones with me until sunset chose us. Then the man returned, the one who measured futures in terms I could not afford. "Who are you wearing?" he asked suddenly, eyes on the collar of the pale shirt under my jacket, the one I'd ironed as if smoothing a page. "Kindness," I said. And let the word be enough. A car purred up to the curb, a dark shape that held itself as if the street belonged to it for a moment, and then would be returned without a scratch. The rear window slid down. Gavin's gaze found mine, steady as the first time, equal parts question and decision. "Get in," he said, not unkindly, not loudly. Just a door opening that happened to be on wheels. I looked at Ethan, who stood very still, his certainty stuttering. I opened the car door and slipped inside. The leather was cool and quiet. The door closed with a soft click that felt like punctuation. "Drive," Gavin told the chauffeur, and the city began to move past us in tidy bands of light. We didn't speak for a block or two. Silence arranged the air between us into something spacious. I watched the reflections in the glass, the room we'd left, the man on the curb, my small figure inside a story I was writing differently, using me to make an old promise jealous. He asked at last, voice neutral, an audit of motives rather than an accusation. "No," I said as simply as I could. "I was using the door that opened." He considered that and let it stand. "Mr. Kim confirmed the documents," he said, as if we were resuming a previous conversation we'd both left a bookmark in. "There is a process. It will not be fast. It will be honest." "I can do honest," I murmured. "I know," he said, and something in his tone made the city lights blur softly at the edges. "The petition to the elders is worth filing. It requires service. The bond option buys time. The placement option adds structure. We'll map them in a way that doesn't spend you." The car turned onto a quieter street where the trees held back the sky like curtains. I watched one leaf let go, spin once and land without fuss. My breath matched its timing. "At the lounge," he added, "if anyone makes you uncomfortable, speak to the manager. If that fails, speak to me. Work should never be a place where your boundaries have to shout to be heard." "They didn't shout tonight," I said. "Thank you." He nodded, then looked out at the night as if it were a ledger he kept balanced for other people so they could sleep. "You handled the room," he said. "Not with force, with tone. That carries farther than most think." We passed a small park where lamps made halos on the path. A jogger moved through them like a metronome. "How did you know I was there?" I asked after a gentle while. "I didn't," he said. "I was passing by. Some places tell you when to stop." The car slowed near my street. He didn't ask if I wanted to be seen to the door. He only offered the option by pausing. "I can walk you in," he said, entirely practical. "I'll be fine," I answered. "You have already done enough for one night." He accepted that with a small incline of his head. "Mr. Kim will reach out in the morning. Rest, Miss Montague." The door opened to the quiet of my block and the faint, familiar scent of our neighbour's jasmine. I stepped out, then turned back. "About the shirt," I said, touching the collar with 2 fingers, not to claim it, only to mark the thread of a story we were trying to keep clean. "I'll return it when the week is calmer. Wear it until you don't need it," he said. "Then fold it away like a lesson you've learned." The window slid up. The car pulled into the soft river of the street and became taillights, then a suggestion, then memory. I walked up the front steps and let myself in, leaving the porch light at the lowest setting. The house held its usual creaks, the kind that tell you wood is still wood and not something to be afraid of. I wrote a line on a scrap by the sink, petition bond, placement, then circled sleep. In my room, I cracked the window for the night breeze and lay down with one hand on my breath, counting the slow tide in and the slower tide out. The day unknotted itself without struggle. The moon found a pocket between the clouds and rested there like a coin in a palm. Somewhere papers were finding their signatures, and a manager was closing a register with practiced care. And the city was reminding itself to be gentle with every person who asked it to. I let the quiet carry me, and the quiet agreed. Morning brought a call from Mr. Kim, punctual as a clock that respects sleep. His voice was clear and unhurried. The documents had been verified. The debt instrument was real, the gamma hold procedural, the amount unchanged. Then he laid out a path the way a careful hand lays out needles and thread, one by one, in order. First, a petition to the elders requesting partial reduction on grounds of public interest and restitution. Second, a bond agreement that would route the majority of my earnings toward the debt under oversight. Third, a temporary placement through a foundation Gavin funded quietly, administration and training support. Hours flexible around school and the lounge. "We will not spend you," he said, almost the way Gavin had. "We will simply spend time." I met him at the legal office after class. He slid forms across a smooth table and let me read every word. I appreciated the silence between explanations. It made room for understanding. I initialed where understanding lived and signed where patience would now reside. He copied my documents and returned them with the same neatness he had received them. Outside, noon light pooled along the sidewalk like gentle water. I called my mother and told her the shape of the plan. She cried softly, not with despair now, but with the relief of a map. I told her we would move 1 square at a time, and that the rules of the board were on our side if we played them with care. The Gamma office was calm in the afternoon. I requested to see the terms in writing and asked about visitation hours. The woman behind the glass had a voice like chamomile. She printed a schedule and circled 2 days with a blue pen. "Bring a list of what you'd like to send in," she advised. "Small comforts are also a kind of currency." I thanked her and folded the paper into my bag, like you fold a note you will look at often. At the training field, I began my first placement hours as a teaching aide. The junior class was a string of bright eyes and restless energy, all questions and dignified pride. I demonstrated a simple form with breath cues, added like piano notes under a melody. "Balance isn't stillness," I told them. "It's listening to tiny adjustments." We practiced with palms open, then turned the open palms into quiet strength. When a boy grew frustrated with his own feet, I had him step into the shadow of the oak and match my breathing for a minute. He returned to the form and found it. He looked surprised. That small astonishment felt like sunlight. Word moved through the pack the way wind moves through tall grass, soft, everywhere, untraceable. Some of it brushed my skin and kept going. Some of it lingered. A pair of women at the market paused their conversation when I came to buy tea. One of them glanced at the borrowed pale shirt under my jacket, thoughtful, not unkind. "That color suits you," she said lightly, and I thanked her for the blessing disguised as comment. At the lounge, the manager kept his promise. Be kind, be steady, and the room honors that. A few regulars learned my name and started leaving notes with their Tips, short lines like, "You made a hard day feel." Simple. I saved the notes in an envelope the way some people save pressed leaves. On the second evening, 2 elders from Red Moon arrived at a corner table. They spoke little and watched a lot. I refilled their hot water without asking and left a plate of sliced fruit with a small nod. When they stood to go, one laid a hand over the other's and approached me. "Your petition reads like someone who breathes before she writes," he said. "Breathe that way when you speak at the hearing." "I will," I said, and meant to. Consequences came quietly, as they often do when a person changes posture. Ethan's friends stopped visiting the lounge in a pack. He came once, alone, took a table by the window and left before ordering. As he rose, our eyes met across a distance that used to be familiar. He looked as if he were searching for a word he had dropped and could not find. I did not help him look. Mr. Kim called to confirm that the bond was approved. My placement hours would start counting at dawn tomorrow. My wages would route directly to the ledger until we passed a threshold that loosened the gamma hold. He sounded almost pleased, which for Mr. Kim meant a warmer adjective than he'd typically allow. "Eat well," he said at the end, a refrain in this new world. Stability is partly blood sugar. That evening, I stopped by the grocery for rice, greens, and broth. On an impulse, I added a small jar of honey for my father. The clerk wrote our last name on the label, careful block letters. "For the list you're making," she said, somehow aware of it. The hearing came under a gentler moon. The elders sat in a semicircle that made a small bay where truth could dock. Gavin was present but did not speak. He watched with that particular economy of attention that made other people feel more precise. I described my father's mistake without embroidery, and our plan without promises I couldn't guarantee. I spoke of hours, service, oversight, and the way a pack is strongest when restoration is part of its spine. Questions arrived like rain you can stand in. What had I learned? That pride breaks quieter than bone, and mends with steadier rituals. What did I offer? Measured work recorded cleanly. What did I ask? Partial reduction tied to community benefit. I didn't say Gavin's name. I didn't need to. My eyes stayed on the elders, my hands folded, my breathing a tide any of us could hear if we cared to. When it was done, they thanked me for speaking in sentences that could hold weight. "We will deliberate," the eldest said, and I believed him. After I stepped outside into a night that smelled of cedar and a faint sweetness I couldn't place. Gavin stood a little ways off, looking not at me but at the sky, beyond the ridge of the hall's roofline. People passed between us as if the space were a river crossing. He didn't cross it. Neither did I. The respect felt like a bridge we were both building from our side. Days unfolded like pages in a book you read at the same hour every evening. Training, study, shifts, careful meals, letters to my father that avoided false hope and offered real weather reports from home. On Sundays, I volunteered at the clinic in the late morning, stocking bandages with a care that felt like prayer. One afternoon, a group of juniors got into a nest of whispers, the kind that tangles quickly. A rumor about me had landed like a burr on their tongues. Before it tightened, I asked them to run laps around the field. Not punishment, only a way to give bodies something useful to do while minds cooled. When they returned, I told them a short story about a wolf who mistook shadows for wolves and learned to ask the moon for better light. They laughed a little, not at me, but at the relief of seeing their own mistake. We went back to forms. The air felt cleaner. That night, Nan came over with takeout and a look I recognized, the one that says, "I have news that wants to be told carefully." "Word is," she said, opening cartons as if unspooling a scroll, "2 elders are leaning toward a reduction if you accept an extra service block, teaching the first years twice a week through the winter." "Good word," I said, letting the happiness be calm. "I can do twice a week." We ate on the floor like we used to after late study sessions. She asked about Mr. Kim's latest email. I asked about her favorite table at the hotel restaurant. We ended up laughing about something small and ordinary, the way the rice always sticks and how you have to coax it with a little water and patience. Not everything needed a larger meaning. Some things were just sticky rice. When she left, I washed the bowls and wrote tomorrow's list on a note in my neat, small hand. Then I ironed the pale shirt one more time, because I enjoyed the way steam curls and disappears. I draped it over the chair and turned down the bed, letting the room grow dim and slow. At the window, the moon looked less like a witness and more like a companion walking the same path a few steps ahead. I touched my mate mark, not with longing this time, but with gratitude for the quiet it had finally granted me. Somewhere in the city, signatures met paper, and doors remembered how to open without slamming first. Somewhere, a man I was learning how to see poured tea and read lines that would change a day. I turned off the lamp, left the window cracked for the cool breath of night, and practiced the oldest form there is: inhale, exhale, repeat, until the mind agrees to let the body lead. The elders scheduled the moon vigil for midweek, a night chosen for its quiet rather than its brightness. Mr. Kim called in the afternoon with instructions spoken like a recipe. Bring your letter of intention. Wear something simple. Eat beforehand. Vigils are long when one is hungry, he said, as if noting weather. I ironed the pale shirt again, then pulled a soft sweater over it, the collar resting neatly where it liked to sit. Nan braided my hair while we stood by the open window, the evening air moving in with the smell of damp cedar. Say what you mean in small sentences, she murmured, fingers patient. Let pauses do their work. We walked up the path to the hall together. Lanterns hung at intervals like moons, learning to be small. In the courtyard, a shallow bowl of water reflected the real moon in pieces. A strip of white ribbon lay across my palms, the elders' custom for petitioners who planned to serve. The ribbon would take one knot for each promise made, one breath for each knot. Inside, the semicircle of elders looked less formal than before, and more like a shoreline. I placed my letter on the table, then stood where I had been told to stand. Gavin was present again, a quiet edge to the room. He did not sit with the elders, and he did not stand near me. He occupied a respectful distance that somehow felt like company. The first part of the vigil belonged to stories. An elder with a voice like smooth stone spoke about restoration as a kind of architecture. Weight redistributed, beams repaired, door frames squared so a door can close without slamming. Another spoke about service that doesn't perform, only persists. Their words were slow and clear, and my breathing matched their cadence without effort. When my name was called, I stepped forward and held my letter but didn't read it yet. I intend to work, I said evenly. I intend to teach the first years twice a week through winter, assist at the clinic on Sundays, and route my earnings to the bond until the ledger says my father can come home. I intend to remain kind while I am tired. A soft ripple moved through the semicircle. Not approval, not dissent, just listening. I tied the first knot in the ribbon for teaching, the second for the clinic, the third for the bond. After each, I let the ribbon hang and took a breath that began in my heels and traveled up until it could exit without catching on any sharp words. The fourth knot I tied for something I hadn't written down. I intend to keep my name honest, I added gently, when people are speaking nearby. The elder with the smooth voice nodded once. 4 is enough, he said. Too many intentions crowd one another. We waited while the moon lifted itself a little higher. When silence had said what it needed, the elders conferred in a hush that sounded like leaves learning to agree. The eldest rose with the care of a man who stands 100 times a day and respects each time as its own. Partial reduction is granted, he announced, tone free of flourish. Conditional on the service you named? The bond remains until the threshold is met. The gamma hold will loosen when the first ledger check clears. His eyes met mine without weight. Rest when the work tells you to. I bowed my head in the small way we bow when gratitude would be too large a gesture to sustain. The ribbon hung from my hands like a gentler spine. As the vigil concluded, people drifted into quiet conversations that mostly left me alone to absorb the shape of the new ground. I stepped outside for air. The courtyard felt like a cup that had just been set down, still warm from the hand. Gavin came out a little later and stood at the low wall, looking toward the pines. The lantern nearest him pressed a gold edge along his sleeve. He didn't call me over. I didn't make him. We let a minute bloom. Then I moved to stand a comfortable distance away, like someone easing into the same shadow. "Congratulations," he said, the word gentle, unadorned. "Thank you," I answered, "for the process, for the steadiness." He gave the smallest nod. "Mr. Kim appreciates a petitioner who reads before signing," he said. "So do I." We listened to the crickets trade their soft arithmetic. A moth tested the lantern's glass and then thought better of it. "My father will ask what I promised," I said after a moment. "I'll tell him the hours and the places. I want to find a way to tell him the feeling. Tell him it's like a bridge you can cross barefoot," Gavin said, "almost to the trees. Firm and not too hot." I smiled because the image landed exactly where I keep my maps. "I will. Also," he added, as if remembering an item on a reasonable list, "there may be a review of the investment failure. If malfeasance is found at the source, reductions sometimes deepen. Do not plan for it, but leave a little room where Grace might like to sit." Grace had been thin lately, but the request sounded practical. "I can set a chair for it," I said. On the way down the path, he matched my pace without asking for it. The ground held small stones that could twist an ankle if a person rushed. We did not rush. At the gate, he paused, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way I had not yet seen on him. "Mr. Kim will forward the formal notice in the morning," he said. "When it arrives, eat something before you read it. People forget that good news can also take energy." "I'll make toast," I said. "Add honey," he advised, as if we were discussing weather again. I thought of the small jar with our name written on the label. "I have some," I said. He glanced at the ribbon in my hand, 4 quiet knots resting like reasons. "Keep that where you see it," he said. "When days feel long, let your fingers find the knots. Remind your mind that you've already decided. Does that work for you?" I asked, not to pry, but to learn. He didn't look at me when he answered. "I do not keep ribbon," he said. "But I keep other anchors." A breath. "Not everything needs to be declared." At home, my mother was waiting with a blanket over her knees and the look a person wears when they have practiced not hoping too loudly. I knelt beside her and gave her the words exactly as they had been given to me. Reduction, service, bond, threshold. She cried a little in the way a roof might leak after a long dry season. Not flooding, only proving it still remembers rain. We made tea and shared a slice of toast with honey. I wrote to my father, 4 lines for 4 knots. "Teaching clinic bond name?" I told him the moon vigil felt like being measured for a garment I could grow into. I told him Grace had a chair at our table now, in case it wanted to visit. Later, I pinned the ribbon above my desk, where morning light would find it first. I set my alarm for a reasonable hour and laid out clothes for the first year's class, the ones who still tried to do everything with their shoulders. I thought of how I would teach them to begin with their feet. When I turned off the lamp, the room learned its gentler shape again. I lay on my side and let my breath be the whole story for a while. In, out, in, out. The house made its familiar settling sounds, wood remembering it was once a tree. Outside, a dog barked twice and then decided it could trust the night. Just before sleep, my phone lit the room with a small halo. A message from an unknown number read, "Ledger notice processing, first placement hours received." Then a second line I hadn't expected, "Review panel opened regarding the failed investment. You may be contacted for a statement." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed, then set the device face down and let the darkness reclaim the room. Grace, I thought, and pictured the empty chair we had set out for it. I hoped it would sit a while. Mr. Kim called before dawn, his voice the same careful cadence that always made my pulse slow. The review panel had opened a file on the failed investment. "They may ask for a statement," he said. "Speak in facts. Let conclusions arrive on their own." I thanked him and watched the window turn from grey to the softest blue, feeling like a page being read at the correct speed. A training. I taught the first years how to begin with their feet. We stood in the oak's shadow and let our knees unlock like doors that no longer needed to slam. The smallest boy, the one who always tried too hard, finally exhaled a perfect breath that made his shoulders agree to be quiet. He looked at me as if I had handed him a key I'd kept in my pocket all along. "You found it yourself," I told him, and meant it. By afternoon, the lounge asked for presence more than energy. Glasses shone with the light of the open door. The piano hummed familiar phrases. I moved through the room the way a steady thought moves through a worried mind. A new pair slipped into a back booth. Two women, with the posture of people who had learned to listen for their own safety. When I brought tea, one of them looked up, and our eyes held for a second longer than strangers usually allow. She was around my age, dressed plainly for someone whose bones carried confidence like an invisible necklace. There was something familiar in the set of her mouth, the neatness of her gestures. A scent reached me under the perfume. Clean, cool, old forest. Lichen, jasmine with honey if you have it, she said. Her voice was low, trained to fit inside quiet places without breaking them. We do, I answered. I'll bring it on the side. I set the tray down and stepped back, but she touched the rim of the cup as if it were a bell. Judy? She asked, not loudly. I confirmed with a nod. Could we speak by the service door, she added, for just a moment? The manager saw us and angled himself within sight, granting permission without words. In the narrow corridor, the air was cooler. She folded her hands, then unfolded them, as if deciding which truth deserved daylight first. I'm Ilara, she said. Gavin's daughter. The name sat with dignity in the small space. I kept my breath even. Thank you for telling me yourself, I said. I won't keep you, she went on. I wanted to say two things. First, I'm sorry for the way my engagement landed on your life. We don't know each other, but harm can travel in lines no one drew on purpose. I let the apology rest where it belonged. Thank you, I said again, and felt something inside me stand down a notch. Second, she said, eyes steady, I read the panel docket. The firm that packaged your father's deal has a history that prefers shadows. Our compliance team flagged them last year. I can share a summary with your counsel. It's not a promise, only light. Light is already a lot, I murmured. She offered a small folded card with a private address. Have Mr. Kim send his request to this line, and if Ethan or his friends make this place unsafe for you, tell the manager. If that fails, tell me. My father isn't the only Landry who understands policy. Something old and sore in me eased. I'm not here to make enemies, I said. Only to make ours count. Then we're the same, she replied, a wryness moving like a bird's shadow across her face. I'll leave you to your evening. Back in the room, the piano had found a melody I didn't know and then made it feel inevitable. I carried tea and refilled water steady as a metronome. No one at their table looked around like a story wanting an audience. They finished in peace and left the booth neater than they'd found it. At closing, the manager wiped a circle on the bar and looked thoughtful. Your friend was polite, he said carefully. She was, I answered. So are you, he smiled without showing his teeth. We'll keep it that way. In the morning, Mr. Kim sounded pleased in the controlled way officials allow themselves. We received materials from Ms. Landry, he said. They illuminate the firm's conduct. Again, no promises. But the panel likes lamps. I visited my father during the first hour of afternoon. The room held the hum of machines that kept track of what people survived. A pane of glass and a small grate gave us our voices back. He looked tired but entire, like a house that has weathered a storm and chosen not to brag about it. I'm working, I told him. Teaching, clinic, bond, petition granted with conditions. He closed his eyes once, the long blink men use when they are remeasuring their pride to fit their gratitude. I did this, he said softly. But your hands are mending what mine broke. We're mending together, I said. That's what a pack is for. We spoke about small things for a while, the way people do when large things need seams reinforced by ordinary thread. Before I left, he lowered his voice. You know, he said, I never taught you the way my grandfather taught me to release a rope. I shook my head, curious. You don't yank, he said. You loosen your fingers one by one. Thumb last. Give the rope time to stop arguing. It remembers you've been holding it. Then you place it down and step back so you don't trip on it. I knew which rope he meant. Thank you, I whispered. On my way out, the woman at the desk slid a small envelope across to me. For your father's tea, she said. Inside was the note I had sent the night of the vigil, folded carefully, with a line in his familiar hand. Your 4 knots made me stand straighter in a chair. I pressed the paper to my chest and let the air go in, go out. The panel scheduled my statement for late week. Mr. Kim coached me in a conference room that smelled faintly of paper and lemon oil. "Arrive on time," he said. "Answer only what is asked. Do not enter the river if a drop will do." The night before, I stood by my window and loosened a rope that had lived under my skin, not with fury, not with speeches. Finger by finger, I let go of the idea that Ethan's choices could still name me. Thumb last. The air around my heart felt taller. At the lounge, a pair of Ethan's friends stepped in and then stepped out again when they saw me. No bravado, no comments. Just absence, which is sometimes the kindest resolution a room can offer. The regular with the weathered hands left me a note that said, "When the tide pulls, tuck your chin and float." The shore is patient. After closing, I walked the 3 quiet blocks home. A car slowed beside the curb, not menacing, simply careful. The window lowered. Gavin's profile was an outline drawn by the streetlight. "Ilara stopped by the lounge," I said before he could ask. "She was generous. She makes rooms better," he replied. "I rely on that more than I admit." We let the evening rest in the open car window. "Thank you for the panel work," I added. "Mr. Kim is a harbor I didn't know I needed." "He is," Gavin said. "So are you. For more people than you realize." I didn't know what to do with that, so I held it the way you hold a warm cup in winter. "I'm learning your kind of patience," I said, meaning the patience that doesn't humiliate anyone. "My kind is just breathing with paperwork," he answered, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Yours is harder." We said goodnight, with the easy formality of 2 people carrying similar maps. The car continued down the street and became taillights, then a suggestion. I climbed my steps and listened to the house remember me. In my room, I touched the ribbon. 4 knots, each the size of a small promise. I told them the day's weather, new lamp on a difficult path, a rope set down without noise, a father who sat taller, a daughter who understood policy like kindness. The moon slid out from behind a patient cloud and placed its gentle coin of light on my floor. I lay down and let breath sort the day into drawers. When thoughts tried to rehearse the panel, I pictured the shallow bowl outside the hall. Moon broken into pieces, still the moon. Sleep arrived like water that knows where it's going. The day of the panel began with toast and honey, just as promised. I ate slowly at the small kitchen table, while the kettle breathed beside me. The ribbon with 4 knots lay near my plate, like a quiet spine. I touched each knot, and the room remembered to be calm. Mr. Kim met me in the lobby outside the hearing room. His suit looked like it had never once argued with a wrinkle. "Facts," he reminded me, tone steady. "Let conclusions walk to you." Inside, the panel sat in their semicircle of measured attention. A recorder clicked on with the soft certainty of a clock. I placed my hands on the table the way I do when I'm showing first years how to begin, with their feet. Weight, even. Breath kind. They asked about the timeline. I gave dates like stepping stones across a creek. They asked what my father believed, what documents he signed, what assurances were offered. I answered without embroidery, each sentence a clean thread. When they asked how we were managing the debt, I described the bond, the service, the placement, the hours stacked like neat wood against winter. A door opened at the back and closed again with care. I didn't turn, but the air shifted the way a room does when someone familiar steps in. I kept my eyes on the elders. Mr. Kim slid a folder forward, the compliance summary Ilara had offered. The panel read in silence, 1 page at a time, pens resting, faces like calm water that still knows how to reflect a sudden bird. When their questions returned, they carried a new angle. Did the representative ever disclose prior sanctions? One elder asked. No, I said. If he had, my father would have asked for counsel before signing. Did he suggest urgency where none was required? Another asked. Yes, I answered. He pressed the idea that waiting would close the only window. They conferred in low tones that sounded like rain behind a door. When they finished, the eldest lifted his gaze. We will confer with the regulatory board, he said. If malfeasance is established, restitution and reduction increase. Your bond remains in motion. Your service is commendable. I exhaled, and only realized then that the breath had been waiting. As we stood, the familiar presence became a person in front of me. Ethan kept a careful distance, eyes moving, as if he were assembling a thought from scattered pieces. He began. Voice soft. Mr. Kim's hand hovered at my elbow, not to claim, only to remind me I wasn't alone. I'm not here to disturb the process, Ethan said quickly, as if he could feel the air shift behind him. I came to listen. He searched my face. You've changed how you stand in a room. I learned to start with my feet, I said. A small, sad smile crossed him, like a shadow of someone we used to know. I thought power was the loudest thing, he murmured. Maybe it's the steadiest, I didn't answer. Some truths are better left to grow without being watered right away. In the corridor outside, Gavin stood speaking low with two elders. He looked different under daylight. Less like an outline, more like a person whose patience was a form of strength rather than a strategy. When he saw me, he didn't beckon. He finished his sentence, inclined to the elders, and joined us with the unrushed gait of someone who owns his time. Miss Montague, he said. Mr. Kim. He acknowledged Ethan with the smallest nod possible that still counted. Good afternoon. Thank you, I told him, meaning the path as much as the greeting. He studied my face with the attention of a man confirming a ledger he already trusted. Eat after adrenaline, he said, the way one might remind someone to take off their boots before resting. The body needs a clear receipt. Mr. Kim's phone hummed once. He glanced at the screen, then at me. Preliminary note from the board, he reported. Investigation opened. Your statement has been logged. We stepped outside. The sky had the clean color of porcelain. A breeze found the collar of the pale shirt and lifted it a fraction, like the page of a book you want to keep reading. Ethan remained near the door, fingers flexing as if letting go of a rope he had been holding too long. I hope your father comes home sooner than the math first suggested, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I hope we all learn to do better math, I replied, and left it there. Nan found me on the steps and pressed a paper bag into my hands. Food, she declared, because all the wise men and women keep saying so. We ate in a pocket of shade by a low wall while the building behind us hummed its layered work. She didn't ask how it went. She could read it in the set of my shoulders. You look like a bridge you can cross barefoot, she said. Firm and not too hot, I answered. And we both smiled because the words had found their home. The afternoon became a series of small, steady tasks. I taught the first years how to tie their wrist straps so the fabric supported more than it constrained. I wrote my father another letter in neat lines, one new promise. I would tell him when Grace arrived, even if it came in pieces. At the clinic, I labeled boxes in clear block letters that even a tired mind could love. Ordinary work kept heroics from getting ideas. Near dusk, an alert lit my phone. Panel update pending. I walked the long way to the lounge, giving the daytime to settle into its drawers. The room welcomed me with its familiar hush. I polished glass, centered napkins, breathed. When I glanced up, Ilara was at the door. No entourage, just a small smile, like a thread pulled through cloth without snagging it. May I sit at the bar? She asked. Of course, I said. Jasmine with honey? Please, we spoke about work, not about men. She told me she used to run drills in an empty conference room before big meetings, just to remind her body it had a say. People assume I inherited calm, she said. But it's practice. I fail at it often. I practice too, I said. The oak helps. The oak always helps, she agreed. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, eyes sharpening, then softened again. Panel update, she said. You'll get the formal notice, but the board found cause to freeze a portion of claims tied to the firm. The elders will adjust your ledger when the order is signed. I held the counter with light fingers, as if it were a rail on a moving train. Thank you, I whispered, to no one in particular, and also to everyone who had carried a folder from one desk to another while breathing. After close, I walked the quiet 3 blocks home. At the corner, a familiar car idled, the window lowered just enough to make a conversation private without making it secret. Adjustment is likely, Gavin said, guessing correctly what had reached me. It will not cancel responsibility. It will share it. Shared weight is still weight, I said, but the back straightens easier. He inclined his head. Your father will be moved to a less restrictive wing when the first adjustment posts. Mr. Kim will confirm. The streetlight cut his profile into calm lines. I thought of all the rooms he had held steady, of all the signatures he had asked the world to write without shaking. Thank you for not making any of this about you, I said. Everything is about all of us, he replied. That's the only way it ever made sense. We said goodnight and let the quiet take back the block. Inside, my mother had fallen asleep on the couch with a book open over her chest. I set a blanket over her and listened to the soft sound of her breath. I made tea I didn't need just to keep the kettle company. At my desk, the ribbon with 4 knots waited where morning would find it. I touched each knot and added a 5th in my mind, not to the ribbon, only to the day. I called it witness, the willingness to see things as they are, not as fear says they must be. Before bed, I stood at the window and practiced the oldest form, inhale, exhale, repeat. In my mind, I walked the training field at dawn, dew on my ankles, the oak throwing a soft shade like a promise of shelter. The moon climbed a little higher, patient as ever, content to be borrowed in a bowl, reflected in pieces, still itself. When sleep came, it came like water finding the low places, filling them without hurry, leaving a surface smooth enough to hold a star. The formal notice arrived in the morning mail, tucked between a grocery flyer and a soft envelope from the clinic. Mr. Kim texted before I could open it. Eat first. I obeyed. Toast and honey at the small table. Steam from the kettle fogging the window, just enough to make the world look kinder. Then I slit the envelope and read slowly, lips moving a little like a student sounding out a new word. Reduction granted. Restitution pursued from the firm. Bond adjusted. Placement hours confirmed. Gamma hold to loosen at the next ledger check. With transfer to a less restrictive wing approved immediately. I touched each knot on the ribbon. Teaching. Clinic bond, name, and felt them answer back the way a good instrument does when you brush its strings. My mother read over my shoulder and pressed a hand to her mouth. We didn't shout. We set 2 cups, poured tea, and let relief settle like snow that had been meaning to fall all along. At the junior class, I told the first years that balance is also about receiving good news without racing ahead of it. We practiced walking slow lines, heel to toe, eyes soft, breath deeper than habit. A girl who always rushed reached the end of the line and looked amazed, as if she had discovered an extra inch of time she could keep in her pocket. At the clinic, I stocked bandages and wrote clearer labels than yesterday. On my break, I called the Gamma desk. The same woman with the chamomile voice confirmed the transfer. He'll be in the sunlight room by afternoon, she said. Bring the honey. The sunlight room lived up to its name. Pale warmth lay across the tile, like a blanket someone remembered to unfold. My father sat straighter than I'd seen in weeks. When he turned, the light put a calm on his face that looked like a choice. I passed the small jar through the slot and watched his hands cradle it like a thing that could tip the day towards steady. The board wrote new numbers, he said. I won't pretend I deserve this mercy, but I'll honor it. We will, I answered. Together. We spoke of ordinary things until ordinary felt like a prize. Before I left, he tapped the back of his chair. Still practicing the rope? He asked gently, finger by finger. Thumb last, I said. Good, he replied. Remember to step back so you don't trip. Outside, the pines made their soft arithmetic. A message from Mr. Kim waited on my phone. Clear, concise, like a path drawn in pencil, so you aren't afraid to walk it. Next check in 3 days. If posted, conditional release begins. He added a second line I read twice. Your testimony assisted 2 other families who had believed the same representative. Lamps matter. At the lounge, the evening moved like a well-rehearsed piece that still leaves room for breath. Ilara slid onto a stool, and the jasmine with honey found her without asking. We spoke again about practice more than fate. She admitted she still rehearsed in empty conference rooms before big days. I told her the first years now breathed before stepping. Tell your father I'll return the shirt when I stop needing it, I said with a small smile. He already knows, she answered. He recognizes when something is serving. Ethan appeared near the door as the piano turned to a familiar melody. He waited for an empty moment and approached the bar, hands open at his sides, like someone making sure not to startle a bird. I'm here to apologize, he said quietly. Not to reopen anything. I nodded once, giving the apology a place to sit. I mistook urgency for importance, he continued. And power for volume. I'm learning slower math. I'm stepping back from the candidacy. Not forever, maybe, but until I can stand in a room without making it smaller. I hope you keep learning, I said, no bitterness in it. We both will. He looked relieved to find no fight waiting for him. For what it's worth, he added, eyes lowered, Ilara deserved a better version of me, too. Then he left as he had come, without spectacle, the door closing with a courtesy I appreciated. After close, I walked home with my jacket folded over one arm, the collar of the pale shirt catching the streetlight like a page. At the corner, a car idled with patience. The window lowered. Gavin watched me approach, posture unhurried. Ty loosened the smallest respectful amount. Numbers posted, he said. Transfer confirmed. The first step is always the smallest and the most important, Mr. Kim told me, I said. Thank you for choosing processes that let a person keep their name. He tilted his head, almost a bow to the idea. Names are how we return to ourselves when rooms make us forget. We didn't fill the quiet with anything unnecessary. He nodded toward the sidewalk that curved into the small park. Walk? We took the path that loops by the pond, where lamps set small moons on the surface. A few leaves decided the time was right to let go. We did not try to catch them. We matched the pace of a conversation that planned to last years, whether as allies, as something unnamed, or simply as two people who knew how to make a room gentler by entering it. Ilara says, you are teaching the first years to begin with their feet, he said. I approve. They approve. Too, I replied, and he smiled at that, the dimple brief and tidy, like a light switched on to check a room and then off again to save the night. We stood at the railing and watched the pond hold the sky. You'll be busy, he said. Bond service, family. If you ever need a door opened that should already have been, call Mr. Kim or me. I don't plan to spend favors, I said. Good, he answered. But keep them where you can reach them. On the way back, he said nothing about the shirt. Neither did I. It had become less a garment and more a reminder of what steadiness looks like when it's put on in the morning and worn into the evening without changing shape. The next 3 days unspooled like careful thread. I taught, I stalked, I studied. I wrote to my father about the pond, about the first year's progress, about the way honey tastes different in sunlight than it does at night. He wrote back about the men in his wing, how they began telling each other stories that didn't make excuses, only maps. My mother planted herbs in small pots on the sill and tended them with a diligence that looked like prayer expressed in chlorophyll. On the morning the ledger ticked past the threshold, my phone lit before dawn. Conditional release begins. Home under supervision until final review. I lay very still and let my body believe the sentence before my mind tried to decorate it. Then I put the kettle on and woke my mother with a hand on her shoulder and a word that had been waiting a long time. Soon. He came home in the afternoon wearing state-issued clothes that fit like a temporary thought. We did not make a ceremony of it. We put soup on the stove and moved the chair by the window to where the light would find him easiest. My mother pressed her forehead to his, then busied herself with ladles and bowls so she wouldn't cry too much at once. He looked around the room as if recognizing each object by name. When he saw the ribbon pinned above my desk, he stood a little taller. 4 knots, he said. And a 5th I keep in my mind, I answered. Witness. He nodded slowly, as if that had been the missing beam. At dusk I folded the pale shirt one last time on my bed. It smelled of mint and soap and many quiet rooms that had treated me like a person rather than a problem. I ironed it, more a ritual than a need, and slid it into a clean bag with a note, worn until it finished its lesson. Thank you. I left it with Laura, who accepted it with the small smile of someone who enjoys endings that arrive at the right volume. Ilara texted an hour later. He put the shirt in his closet like a book he intends to reread. I didn't reply. Some messages are meant to be folded and kept. The elders scheduled one final meeting for the formalities that make relief official. Mr. Kim sat to my left, my mother to my right, my father with his shoulders squared, not from stubbornness, but from alignment. We signed where they pointed. The eldest looked at the ribbon and then at me. "Keep it up until spring," he advised. "Even good structures deserve a season to learn themselves." That night, we ate dinner at the small table, elbows brushing now and then in the way families do when the room is not big, but the comfort is. After, I walked to the park and sat on the bench by the pond. The lamps planted their small moons again. The air smelled of damp leaves and the promise that winter would arrive kindly if we met it with blankets and reasonable expectations. Footsteps approached, unhurried. Gavin sat at the other end of the bench and left the polite space between us that says, "Here is room. Choose it if you want it." We didn't talk about past or future. We let the present be exactly as long as it needed. A breeze pulled a strand of hair across my cheek. I tucked it behind my ear and felt the day settle in my bones like a warm stone. "Sometimes," he said at last, voice a little lower than usual, "the most powerful thing we do is let rooms be quiet." "I can do that," I said. "I know," he replied. We watched the pond hold two perfect reflections of the same lamp. A small ripple blurred the circles, and then they found themselves again, as if to prove they knew how. When I got home, the house smelled like tea and the herb pots on the sill. My father had fallen asleep in the sunlight chair, head tilted, mouth relaxed. My mother dozed on the couch with a book half open over her chest. I covered them both and turned out the lamp, leaving only the porch light in its lowest setting to guard the edges of the night. In my room, I touched the ribbon once and then, on a quiet impulse, tied a fifth knot for real, small and neat, witness made visible. I breathed in, out, until breath was the whole story, and the story was kind. The moon climbed above the rooftops, patient as ever. Somewhere a file,